population and subsistence. And I think this is a good place to work it into the course. The world population is nearly 8 billion people. 25% of the world's population is living in poverty, and about 10% are in extreme poverty. So the question is whether or not it's because there are too many people. Nearly 5 million Americans, or 1.5% of the population, are living on $5 or less a day. That's pretty serious poverty, but it's not extreme poverty. And whether we're talking about Reverend Thomas Malthus at the end of the 18th century or the zero growth population movement in the 1970s, the question is whether or not poverty is really due to overpopulation. And since COVID came upon us, the television news says that 150 more people and I'm sorry, it's not only COVID, but it's the war in Ukraine. 150 more million people are hungry today than were before. So it's not as good as it could be. But certainly, if the population continued to increase, all of the things stayed the same, we would have more poverty and hunger. And certainly, if the population increases, excuse me, and production goes on with the same level of pollution and CO2 emissions, it's going to look like the world is overpopulated. So the question is whether the poverty and hunger we have now are due to overpopulation. Is there any correlation between population density and the level and extent of poverty? And if we look up here at Australia, with 221 people per square mile of arable land, they produce $62,000 per person per year, and only 0.7% of their population live on $5 or less a day. Now, PPP stands for Purchasing Power Parity. It attempts to compensate for exchange rates and costs of living, and somehow, I don't know how it actually does it, but these numbers are only estimates. Nonetheless, they give us some perspective on the density of population and the level and extent of poverty. Russia, 309 people per square mile of arable land. They produce almost $32,000 per person per year, and 3.3% of their population are living on less than $5 a day. And Argentina, with 376 people, produces $26,000 per person, and they have 18% of their population living in poverty. The United States, with 547 people, produces $75,000 per person per year, and only 1.5% of our population are impoverished. Germany, 1,862 people per square mile of arable land. They produce $64,000 worth of goods or services per person per year, and 0.5% of their population lives on less than $5 a day. Whereas Indonesia, with 2,700 people per square mile, produces $15,000 a year per person, and 51%, over half of their population, is living on less than $5 a day. Contrasted with the United Kingdom, with a little bit more, 28,000 people, 2,800 people per square mile. They produce $56,000 per year, and almost 1%, little less than 1% of their population is impoverished, living on less than $5 a day. Bangladesh, 5,366 people per square mile. They produce $8,000 a year per person, and 76% of their population lives on less than $5 per day. Japan, 7,850, and they produce $49,000 per person, and only 1.2% of their population are living on less than $5 a day. Egypt, 9,265 people per square mile. They produce $16,000 per person, and 73% of their population are living on less than $5 a day. So the question next is, have the natural resources been largely exhausted in these impoverished countries? Does all the wealth go to those who produce it in these impoverished countries? Where do we find the greatest evidence of wealth per person? Is it densely or sparsely populated countries or communities? And I'm thinking about New York City, which is always a good place to come up with an example. Is it the city of New York where we find the most efficient production, or is it in the rural counties of New York State? In fact, it's the increase in population that enables the division of labor, the increase in the total knowledge and skill, the accumulation of special tools and machines, and economies of scale. There is, of course, a point of diminishing returns, whereas if we added more people to the same area, we would actually get less per person because we'd be getting in each other's way. But has any country in the world reached a population that has caused diminished returns and therefore an increase in poverty? And of course, no, thank you. Now, South Korea, of course, is the extreme. It's the most densely populated of all those countries on that list with over 25 million people. I don't think any place is more densely populated than Singapore. But South Korea, with 7,920 people per square mile, produces $53,574 per person, and only 0.7% of its people are living on less than $5 a day. And that's less than half the rate of the United States. Now, as I was going over this, getting ready for this presentation, I was thinking about China, and I looked it up, and they have about 3,000 people per square mile of arable land. So that's kind of right in the middle between the United States and Russia and South Korea and Japan and these very densely populated places. And I remembered, that's what made me think of it. I remembered that they had brought a lot of people out of poverty, and it looks like they brought 750 million people out of extreme poverty. That's twice the population of the United States. But I should go read my own notes here. In 1990, China had 78% of its population living on less than $5.50 a day. In 2016, they only had 21% of their population living on less than $5 a day. That's still 13 times the number of people living on less than $5 a day in the United States. So China, in spite of their enormous step forward, they're still nowhere near the standard of living in the United States. Their population has declined. In fact, it's declined by 800,000 people, but that was after 10 times that many people were lifted out of extreme poverty. So again, it's an example of how they did decrease the number of impoverished people, and the ratio of the population to the arable land remained the same. Now they've got a little less population, but those statistics were from before this previous year when they started to lose population. Any questions or comments?